I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co, and today I'm giving my first impressions of Odalin Dungeons of Doom from Degori Games. And I say first impressions over here because, first of all, this is a prototype, all rules and components subject to change, and I'll have a link to the crowdfunding campaign down below. Speaking of which, by the way, apologies for the very late coverage on this one. I know I'm getting this to you on the last day, but hopefully that's enough time for you to still helpfully make a decision, and if not, there's always going to be the Pledge Manager phase, so still plenty of time despite me being very late on this video. But going back to what I said about first impressions, the nature of the content I received over here and the amount of content I received versus what the game is trying to do means I've only gotten a chance to loosely start to explore the mechanics in the first journey, the first campaign book that the first campaign book episode that they gave me. So there's not been as much room to explore this game as I would like to be able to be more certain in how I feel about it, but we'll get into all of that at the end as well. So first impressions just based on the access to the content I have. That said, Odalin Dungeons of Doom is kind of mostly a dungeon crawler. I mean, ultimately it's a dungeon crawler. It's trying to explore a Diablo style of gameplay in terms of the way you're going to be charging through rooms, taking out enemies, gathering loot, and kind of more of a hack and slash aspect to it. In fact, there's a specific hack and slash mode to the game, but we'll talk more about that soon. The general idea is you're going to be taking on characters. You're going to have these characters over here. I'm set up for a two-player game or a solo game. The solo game has you controlling two characters, but you can play it as a 1 to 4 player game. Solo playing it, controlling two characters. 2 or 3 players can either have a mode where you're going to be having an extra cards thrown in that you can utilize those to activate characters, or alternatively a simplified hero mode. So if you're playing less than 4 characters, there's 2 different ways to go ahead and explore that, either full character count with simplified mode, or alternatively using initiative cards that will give you extra actions for those characters, as well as being able to refresh different items. But past that, you're going to have your characters, and then you're going to go through a journey phase and a dungeon phase. The journey phase over here is going to be in our little campaign book. You're going to go ahead and open it up to the journey phase. And I should note, and I recognize I'm a little all over the place over here, I should note there's also single shot modes as well in case you don't want to go through this. But in the journey phase, you're going to go ahead and open this up. You'll start reading through the campaign book, going through, you have a choice between a fast action mode, which will take you directly to the action, but skipping some of the things you can otherwise do. Or alternatively, you're going to be going on a sequence of adventures. You go into the thing, you see an old woman, you talk to her, you go to that option or that option, depending on what choices you make. Now, I'm not going to fully go into all of this, but I will say this is going to be an extensive degree of choose your own adventure with various impacts and making skill tests along the way. You'll add favor with various characters, you'll lose favor with various characters, you'll be making skill tests, and those will all affect how your initial journey begins. At a certain point in this adventure, you're going to go ahead and let's see if I can get to it. We have a starting dungeon over here. So you're going to go and start off in the dungeon. You can be going through a sequence over here. And again, the choose your own adventure elements don't quite stop over here. You're still going to have choices to make, things to interact with, and those choices will potentially decide what enemies spawn or how you go from room to room. As you go from room to room, you're going to spawn new tiles, making new decisions along the way. So it's effectively a full journey phase that leads to a dungeon phase, and then even once you're in the dungeon phase, as you explore through the various rooms of the dungeon, you're still going to be making choices and interacting in different ways that will still have impact on the journey outside of purely what's happening in the actual dungeon crawler aspect of things. That kind of touches upon the journey and or continuous choose your own adventure elements of the game. As far as the actual dungeon phase, Odalin has a bunch of things that make this stand out from your typical dungeon crawler. The first is going to be the way you're combining your actual character class together with a demon. You're going to have demons in the game, and you're going to have these cards over here. These cards are actually a combination of your individual character card plus an overlay demon card that goes on top of it, and that's going to give you, and the little punched out hole in the middle, that's going to give you the combination of cards over here that decides how your character activates. And so that's already going to define how this game is a little different in terms of the way the characters are a combination of 2 different facets, and every time you play a card, that's going to have a big ramification on the options available to you in the game. So already you have this, I'm currently playing as Tuscan, combined with Vine, the Primarch of Savagery, and over here we have Marrakesh, combined with Astarte, the Queen of Lust over here. So you have different characters with their own different roles or classes of ways they operate, the casting magic, being a bit more a tank, and then you combine that with these cards from the demon class, and that demon's not just going to define the individual cards you have right now, but there's also an element in Odalin in which you can transform into a demon, either as a choice or against your will, and that will have different impacts in the game. But effectively, you're managing your corruption track, and when you get to 6 corruption, you're going to, if you have soul as well, if you trade in 6 corruption and soul, you can transform into a demon and get a more powerful turn out of that. Alternatively, if you get to 10 corruption, well, then you lose control instead, so it's not quite the same level of impact there. But you're going to have these characters, you're going to have these demon modes, And then you're going to be making choices in the game by playing cards. Once you get to a point in the game where you have yourself set up against the enemies. And over here, again, prototype, I currently just have these little tokens as opposed to the miniatures. If you want to check out more information or more visuals on the miniatures, you can check out King of Average's video. He has a full set of the miniatures. You can see everything there. I believe he did a full detailed unboxing, if I recall, as well. But right now I'm dealing with these tokens over here. But once you have a dungeon situation set up, you're going to go ahead and play through these initiative cards. You're going to shuffle the initiative deck, and you're going to lay those out, and that initiative card, that initiative order is going to decide who's acting in what order. So we go ahead and reveal these cards over here. We have a dire snake. Ooh, that's not a good starting draw over here. We have one of the worst possible starting draws I've had so far, where you have all the dire snakes plus the viper warrior, all 4 enemies activating before us. And then we have our Marakush, we have our amulet of power, we have Tuscan, and then another amulet of power. And those amulet of powers are those things that I mentioned that accommodate for a lower player count, where it gives you more agency over who activates, so you can control and activate characters multiple times. So right now, possibly the worst single setup I've had since playing this game, where every single enemy activates before me, but at least the general idea is still in play. You're going to have characters, the enemies over here, with their health, their defense, so the health is how much hit points they have. Defense is what you have to roll to actually hit them. And then we have to go ahead and grab their particular decks. We have our Dire Snake and our Viper Warrior, and these are going to be the things they do on their turn. You see, enemies are going to go ahead and draw from their deck. Right now we have a Dire Snake activating, so we go to the Dire Snake deck, and we would draw a card, and they're going to activate, and it's going to choose who they target, how much damage they do, how they move. This will define all their actions, including fallback actions if they can't do anything positive. So these are going to go ahead and cause how the enemies attack the heroes in the game. And so this guy's going to go ahead and move towards the heroes, and he's going to be attacking the hero with the lowest corruption, which right now is either of them. So the closest one will be over here, will be attacking Tuscan, and he's going to go ahead and attack Tuscan. Now this is where when enemies attack in the game, they're just going to do whatever the card says. It's up to the heroes to roll to prevent that damage. And this is where Tuscan over here is going to reference his plate armor. These are all their abilities. You have some consumables over here. You have their starting gear. This is all starting gear right now, although there is a whole deck full of items, and this is literally just these are just the level 1 items right now in the game. We have our starters at level 1. Right now I don't even have access to the level 2s and 3s as the game escalates, because again, first impression is just what I have access to over here. But you have all these items that will give you even stronger abilities, and again, work in progress on the art, as I mentioned, prototype and all that. And so you have all this gear here, but using the starting gear, we're going to look at his plate armor, and we're going to see that right now we can go ahead and roll 2 greens to negate that damage over here. So he's going to attack us with 1, we're going to roll, and we got these over here. So these symbols over here will negate damage, will lower damage, I should say, lower damage for each symbol. But if you ever rolled 2 of these, you would completely ignore the attack. So getting those is very strong if you can get both of those, but not even all the characters can. So for example, Marakush over here is only going to roll 1 green die because of their Sorcerer's Robe. They don't even have the option to get that. Now you also have abilities on these cards over here. These abilities are going to, for example, if we wanted to, if we had rolled that and we really needed, if it's a strong attack, we could roll this and then see if we could re-roll. No, unfortunately, we didn't get a better attack over there. So you have gear you can go ahead and flip and tap and turn in. I should note, if you're playing with the lower player counts, the Amulet of Powers will actually let you refresh equipment so that you don't lose out from not having access to as many gear, because you can reuse gear from characters when you're playing at less than a 4-player count. So that's effectively the main sequence of how a character is going to activate, how an enemy is going to activate. You lay out the initiative row. The characters are going to activate in initiative order. They're going to go ahead and do whatever their card says. If it's an enemy, they'll likely be attacking you in some way, shape, or form. You'll get to roll defensively, and you'll take damage or not, depending on how that plays out. Now, when eventually it gets to your turn, after this wave of enemies attacks me and I deal with all their cards, when it gets to our turn, we're going to look at our cards and have a chance to play our cards. Now, cards from your own cards have a top and a bottom part. Your top part's going to be your attack action, and the bottom part's going to be an instant over here, where you effectively activate off turn. And so you can go ahead and again, you can look at the various options. You can gain corruption, you can attack an enemy. You want to be mindful of your movement stat over here, as well as how it's going to affect the balance track over here. The balance track over here is basically this concept that this token is going to be moving, and a few things can affect in different ways, killing enemies, the cards you play. These can affect these things in different ways, which will have different impacts, better or worse, as you go through keeping this thing in balance in the game. So you want to be mindful of the balance track as you try to go ahead and utilize your cards and keep things in check. I should note over here, there's another mode to play play, where I mentioned the hack and slash mode. There's a hack and slash mode instead. I believe this was done based off of player feedback already. It might be that it was just a different mode, I'm not certain. But the hack and slash mode would use the other side, and I don't have it over here. Over here currently I have the simplified casual mode, but the hack and slash would in theory use the other side of this in the final game. And the hack and slash mode gives you a advantage that if you attack enemies with their opposing types, and I have not played with the hack and slash mode, I should say that because I don't have it over here, but if you attack enemies with their opposing type, you can slowly gain benefits and then cash in those benefits all at once, lowering your tokens. So it gives you a different kind of puzzle to solve for, so you can choose which puzzle you prefer. I should note there's actually 2 gameplays out. You can see, I'll try to link them down below, but there's 2 gameplays on Odalin, one using the hack and slash mode, one using the balance mode, if you want to get a sense or feel of how those operate. But so yeah, players on their turn are going to go ahead, activate their card, move and attack as necessary, rolling your combat dice this time over here. These will have different benefits, including sometimes, depending on what you roll, you'll be able to move up on the tracks over here, so you want to be mindful of your soul and your corruption, trying to get your soul up as fast as possible, so you can trade in your corruption for a powerful turn as opposed to being overwhelmed by it, and then past that, dealing various damage and attacking the enemies over there with the cards and the cards that you play, the dice you roll, and being able to use your abilities as well. That's the core flow of Odalin. The core flow is you have a starting journey mode. You go into the journey mode, you do the choose your own adventure, you do all the things you need to do there. You eventually end up in some sort of tile, generally a tile, which you're going to go ahead and be fighting enemies. You'll engage with various elements on the tile. Enemies might spawn. You again go through a sequence of engaging with those enemies, laying out the initiative cards depending on the enemies in play, going ahead and attacking those enemies while resolving the initiative cards, having them all activate, yourself and the enemies activating in orders to try to take each other out, and then eventually moving on to the next room. We'll be likely facing off against a stronger group of enemies as you try to power your way through the scenario to its conclusion, and then continue that cycle where you'll be able to do a variety of things, from gathering new cards to add to your deck, to being able to level up cards to the other sides over here to get a stronger card effect, and just going through that progression of Odalin. So that is kind of a rough overview of Odalin Dungeons of Doom. There's a lot of elements we haven't really fully gotten to. There's a lot of elements you haven't gotten seen yet. There's a lot of elements I haven't gotten to see yet, but that's the basic idea of playing through Odalin. With that, let's go ahead and dive into my first impressions on the game. And again, it is first impressions because I've definitely gotten enough play on this game to be able to get a good feel for how the game operates, but I haven't gotten to see anything on the higher levels. I haven't been able to go through an extended amount of time. I've only really had access to this one starting dungeon and the few rooms it entails, so I just have a limited exposure to the game. So I have thoughts, I have opinions and all that, but it's definitely tempered by we'll get to it. We'll get to more final thoughts. Let's start off with what I like. So starting off with what I like over here, which is the double use cards element. The fact that you have these cards in your hand that you're trying to play, that have different things you want to be mindful of, from the way you're going to attack, from the instant actions you can take, trying to balance which cards, which things to use at which time. I like that aspect, and I like the combining aspect of the heroes, of the roles plus the demons combining together to give you a choice as to what kind of play style do you want to go with, because you're trying to choose 2 different play styles and combining them in the ways they operate. From okay, well, which demon will the Guardian pair nicely with? If I'm going with a nice tanky character, which of the demons cards do you want to go through that will help you balance and augment that towards your playstyle. So you really have a lot of choice as far as how you build your character before you even get into further customization, upgrades, and all that things, gear, items. Just from the very get-go, you have a good amount of agency over how you're going to build your character. I like the instant off-turn actions. They can feel very powerful to be able to activate off-turn. I have a specific one over here. So if you have Crashing Stomp over here, and this is specifically Tuscan's card, so it's not the demon side, it's his side, but you go ahead and start a turn, all enemies within 3 take 4 damage, and you pull 2 them. So this is going to be a huge card that's going to really pull everyone in and feels very thematic to the character and just feels very strong and powerful to be able to play out. So I like the off-turn, the instant off-turn actions in general. The combination of class, like I mentioned already, gives you a lot of agency to how to build your characters, the amount of gear and items you can get in the game. And again, I haven't been able to even get to the upper levels of what the game has, or even see what the game has to offer in that sense, but already, even the starting gear feels like you have a lot of agency, or not necessarily a lot of agency. The starting gear gives you fun things you can do in the game, like even being able to re-roll that plate armor for that one time you really need to avoid an attack. Those things are going to be very, very helpful, and it feels like using these is a choice you have to make as far as when and how it's going to most benefit, most assist you in the game. So I like the equipment the game has, and that's with your starter equipment. As you move into level 1 equipment, it already feels more powerful, and like I said already, haven't even got to see level 2 or 3. Transforming your character into demon mode. Again, it's another fun thing you can do that gives you more things to try to be mindful of and balance around. Because not only do you have your basic cards, not only are you choosing which cards to hold on to and when, not only are you choosing which equipment to activate and when, but you're also choosing when to get those more powerful turns, when to take advantage. Well, choosing if you actually have enough soul to actually be able to cash in to go into demon mode when you can control it a bit more. But that gives you another thing to manage, another resource effectively to manage as you go through the dungeons over here, as you figure out which room needs that extra boost for you to take things out. And the enemies feel powerful and therefore rewarding to take down. Now, if you've played Teneris Adventures, they're not as powerful as Teneris Adventures, where literally the enemies felt like they felt completely overwhelming at times, but the enemies do give you a challenge to face off against. Being in a room with 4 enemies who are all going before you, that feels like an intimidating moment in the game, one that you have to be prepared for and balance around. So overall, the enemies, because they feel difficult, they also feel rewarding to take out. I like the balance mode overall. The hack and slash mode does intrigue me, but I haven't gotten to play that. But the balance mode, again, it gives you something else to be mindful of. And this is one of those that's tricky because in general, I don't know if I love the games where you have to keep things in balance, but I do like the decision play around it. So I like the mindfulness I have as a character, as a player, when I'm trying to choose which cards to play, which enemies to take out, in order to keep things as in check as possible to favor me. So I like the strategic puzzle it provides, but it also does force you down certain lanes. But overall, I like the balance mode. I do want to try the hack and slash mode and see how I feel with that. Upgrading character cards, abilities, equipment, all those things. Again, lots of ways to develop and grow through the game, although again, limited in terms of what I got to see from there, but even the taste of what I got to see still feels strong enough. And then the journey phase plus dungeon phase, I like that as well. The fact that you have this, and again, I'm coming at this game from being someone who loves Teneris Adventures, loves Arena of the Contest, and that game strongly has that separation of the journey phase and then the actual dungeon phase. And this has a similar, slightly different, which we'll get to in the things I don't like, but this game has a similar arc as far as the choose your own adventure modes you're going to be going through, as far as the choices you make, the way you interact with things, that do feel like it has a real impact on the game as you go through it, and also feels like a fun little story as far as, sometimes, again, I only have limited exposure to this one, it could feel a bit disconnected in terms of what you're doing, but it still feels overall satisfying to go through that choose your own adventure to make those choices. And then lastly, I'll say I kind of touched upon this already, but I like the different ways to handle lower player counts. The fact that you can either just play fewer characters, although you can't play true solo, you either play fewer characters and just deal with those extra Amulet of Power cards, or alternatively you can play with these simplified hero modes, and that gives you both options to engage within the game. As far as things I don't like in the game, there's really only one thing that I sort of don't like about what this game is doing, although I'll have more thoughts in my final thoughts section. The main thing I didn't like is I didn't like the constant storytime interruptions. Meaning the game has a journey mode and then it has a dungeon mode, but even within the dungeon mode, it kind of really holds on to elements of the journey mode, which I like to an extent. It actually feels a bit reminiscent of Chronicles of Drunagar, in the way you'll have elements on the board and you choose how to interact with those elements, and that might choose how the game progresses to the next scene or whatnot. And I like that lower level element. I like the lower level, if you choose to like press this dial or push that button or grab the journal off the floor, that will impact what happens next. I do like that. It gives me a sense of not just being a pure dungeon crawler, but a bit more agency thrown in. What I didn't necessarily care for as much is the choose your own adventure elements of, talking to a character in between those phases, because to me, I kind of want to get more into the actual dungeon crawler mode. I just did the whole choose your own adventure mode, and now I'm in the dungeon, so I want to deal with the room and then go to the next room. And sure, it is fun that when I pull that thing off the shelf, those enemies spawn, and if I had instead picked up the books, those enemies would respond, so the order in which things would have engaged, I like that simplicity, but I think the game does a bit more than I personally like in terms of, I do feel the dungeon mode is still broken up and chopped up into, okay, great, we have journey mode with the choose your own adventure, we finally spawn some enemies, we take out those enemies, and then you're still going to have find yourself with interruptions and talking with characters and having different little branching pathways, which you may well like, because it does give you that additional layer of, what's the word for it? Not investment of oh my gosh, there's a word I'm looking for, the immersiveness. It gives you an additional level of immersiveness into the actual story of what you're doing as you wander from room to room, but it does so by taking me a bit out of the fact that I'm kind of at the point where I now want to just deal with the tactical flow of the game. So it's not a big ding, but I definitely think there was a bit more choose your own adventure laid into the dungeon phase than I would have liked. I like a little bit of choice, but not interruptions, if that makes sense. As far as I can see others not liking, first of all, there's a lack of true solo in the game, which doesn't bother me. Controlling 4 characters can always be a burden. Controlling 2 I don't find overwhelming overwhelming, although it is game dependent. I would say over here, I did not find controlling 2 characters at all overwhelming to go through. And again, there's also the simplified hero mode if you do want to control 4 characters, but there's not true solo, at least not yet. I'll also say that very similar to its big brother, Teneris Adventures, it is very easy to miss a lot of things in this game. You have tons of stuff you're looking at from your characters. Your character's gear and their equipment and their consumables, from the actual abilities they have themselves, from the demon's abilities they have, from the fact that you can have this little discard 1 card and pay HP to do 3 different things over here. I find players will frequently forget this over here. It's a simple action. All characters have the same thing, where you can discard a card and pay 1 HP to do one of 3 things. Either to move further, to lower the corruption you take, or I'm forgetting the last one, to ignore the effects of the corruption track and the balance track to have it where you want. So you're going to have those options available to you at all points, but I find players frequently forget about those options, myself included. And again, that's just because you have so much information from the enemies you're facing off against, from the cards. Your cards are chock full of information over here. These cards get very easy to read once you go through the flow and get used to them, but when you first start off, it's just information overload, and there's a lot of things to be mindful of. So this is one of those games where you're likely going to miss things and miss that you could have done that, or alternatively miss that you should have done that, meaning one is a lack of being able to do something you could have, and the other is you might just forget that that enemy had that modifier in play, and therefore you should have taken 1 damage at the start of your turn and you missed it. So you're going to have a lot of things going on. This is a high maintenance game, which for me, I don't mind those, but I also don't mind missing things in those games. If you mind that, there's a lot to be mindful of as you go through this. As far as semi-final thoughts, I can't call this final thoughts because again, this is a first impressions, but as far as semi-final thoughts on Odalin Dungeons of Doom, I overall really enjoyed this game. Like, really enjoyed this game. And now I'm coming at this as someone who very much likes Teneris Adventures, and Odalin does feel like it's kind of built on the same system to a degree while being very different. Meaning, there's a lot of things that are different here, but the biggest thing is it has a lot of the board positioning, a lot of the tactical enemy awareness, a lot of the general hero variability of how you're going to build your character, of the different things you can do. It has a lot of those things, but it feels like they took it and made it a drop more accessible. There's a drop more of a focus on the going through multiple rooms, taking out enemies, as opposed to the long, drawn-out tactical battles. For me, this really feels like almost a refresher after Teneris Adventures, meaning if you're coming at this from not Teneris Adventures, there's a lot to be mindful of here. There's a lot to manage. There's a lot that will take your time, effort, and attention. But if you're coming at this from Teneris Adventures, it kind of feeds into the same things that I enjoyed there while being a bit easier. Not easier, and easier is the wrong word. A bit less drawn out, less intense, and a bit more hack and slash. There's a bit more of the fun of the reward and a bit less of the mental mindfulness of every single thing going on in the game. It might be comparing it to Zombicide versus Gloomhaven might be a good example. I'm not overly sure, but I very much enjoy everything I've gotten to see and do in this game. Everything just is fun. Its powers and abilities, this combination of characters. There's ways to upgrade your characters in the game across the course of the individual game, across the arc of the full game. The enemies you face off against are difficult enough that makes them rewarding to deal with and take out. There's tactical management of the game. There is the part where sometimes, again, I've never actually had something this bad happen to me in an actual game, but this kind of thing, I've had things close to this as far as just the difference between when you lay out the initiative row and you're going first and taking them all out versus when they have a bunch of enemies going first and you can't do anything about it. That really just changes the way you deal with it. But even if you have something that's even the smallest difference of having this be over here, that totally changes the way you engage with this over here, because maybe you try to focus on taking out the blue snake before you can even have a chance to act. And so you have these decisions you're constantly making as far as how you're going to try to deal with the room in front of you, and you go through that room by room. This is overall a very satisfying experience with lots of powers and abilities, lots of feeling powerful as you go through the game, while also having enough of a threat that you don't feel like you can simply do whatever you want. You feel powerful, but you feel you earned the wins you got in the game. So overall, I very much enjoyed the game. Ratings wise for me, I'm not going to give it a rating per se, I'm going to give it a rating plus. And this is a little bit of my own fatigue around recent games I've covered, from Odalin to Blood to Grim Coven. There have been a lot of games I've played recently where I feel I've gotten a taste of the experience and not the full experience, and the tricky part there is I'm hesitant to be too excited about a game when I didn't have access to the full experience. Because for me, I'm going to put Odalin as a 4+. A 4+ to me is not a rating per se, it's that I've seen enough of this game that I'd be very surprised if my rating on this was lower than a 4 when I'm done playing through it all or going through more of the experience. I want to give it a higher rating, but I don't feel I've seen enough to be able to comfortably do that and feel certain that that rating stands once the final game is here. I really enjoy Odalin Dungeons of Doom. I could see myself playing this more than Teneris, which is a game I gave a 5 out of 5, but I haven't seen enough, and not because I think it's better, but because I think it's a a little more streamlined, a little bit more easy to dive into, both in terms of the rules. The rules are significantly shorter, the complexity of the rules is significantly shorter, the complexity of the enemy interactions are less brain burnery, the length of scenarios are not as long. It feels like it gives me a lot of the same things that Scenarios does, but in a more accessible format at the cost of some of the complexity and interactions. Scenarios has some moments where you can feel really, really cool when you found your pattern through all the things in your way trying to stop you from winning, and you're able to finally figure out your pathway forward. Odalin to me feels like it builds off that same DNA while being very, very different. These are not the same games at all, but for me fall into a similar space. So for me, my rating right now is a 4+. I think my rating will be higher than a 4. I just need to see more of the game to be able to confidently say that and feel comfortable in that rating, as opposed to being worried that the final game won't be where I want it to be. So Odalin, Odalin Dungeons of Doom is a 4+ for me, and we'll see where the final game goes once I have time to really dive into it. As far as other game recommendations, first of all, there's Tenaris Adventures. If you like Odalin, I think there's a lot of similar DNA in Tenaris Adventures. Again, it's one of those weird things where when I say similar DNA, I think things like, Massive Darkness 2 versus Zombicide. There's clearly some degree of overlaying elements while being very, very different games, but that same DNA is present there. And then also if you like that challenge of how to deal with your cards, of which choices to make when you're trying to figure out the attacks and the instants and all those, this obviously does feel very reminiscent of Gloomhaven and the challenge you have there while trying to be mindful of which top half and which bottom half of cards to activate. This does so in a very different way that manages to feel completely different, but does have that same thought process as you deal with your hand of cards. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radical from Board Game Co. I hope you enjoyed this video. I apologize for how late it was, but hopefully there's still enough time for it to be in some way helpful as you make a choice whether this game is right for you. In any case, until next time, I hope you have a good one.